Good morning, everyone. We're coming to you live from the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution dock. Yes. We're coming to you live from the dock, Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution in Woods Hole, Massachusetts. You're looking at the research vessel Atlantis. And just behind the gray crane in the middle of the frame, you can see the research submersible Alvin. We're in the process of rolling it out on deck in preparation for lifting it off of the deck and onto the truck you see over on the right. The reason they're taking the sub off are several. First, this is part of a regular 5-year maintenance period. Every 5 years, the sub comes off the ship. They take it completely apart, inspect every piece, put it back together. This particular maintenance period is kind of special because it's the last phase of a long plan to upgrade to the sub that'll allow it to extend its reach from 4,500 meters, or about 2.8 miles depth, to 6,500 meters, which is 4 miles deep. At the same time, this was planned to coincide with Atlantis going all the way over to the west coast and going through what's called its midlife refit. The ship's 20 years old, over 20 years old now, and this refit give it new engines and extend its life another 20 years or so. If you're just joining us, we're live on the dock of the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution in Woods Hole, Massachusetts, getting ready for the offload of the research submersible Alvin. It's partly rolled out of its hangar. You can see right there in front. They're just behind the gray crane. The big crane on the right, the yellow crane, is a 165-ton crane from Baxter. They're the guys who usually come down here to help us take the sub off. They're planning on lifting the sub around 9 o'clock or so. The sub, Alvin, is 56 years old, but the only thing that's that old is the name itself. Every 5 years, like I said, the sub comes out of the water or off the ship. They take it completely apart, inspect every piece, replace whatever needs to be replaced, put it back together. This year, they're going to be finishing a series of upgrades that began back in 2011 to 2013 when the sub got a brand new personnel sphere, new thrusters, a lot of new systems. About 70% of the sub is already rated to get to 6,500 meters. With this maintenance period, they're going to upgrade the variable ballast system, which allows the sub to stay level in the water. And when that's done, the entire sub will be rated to dive to 4 miles depth, 6,500 meters, putting 98% of the seafloor within reach of the submersible. That will allow scientists to study things like the Clipperton-Clariton fracture zone, where there's great interest in deep seafloor mining. Study the ecosystem there that might be affected by mining operations. There's also a lot of new mid-plate volcanic activity in the abyssal zone that geologists are just learning about and want to learn more about what that does, how that affects tectonic activity on the planet. And also they'll be able to reach the transition between the abyssal zone and the Hadal zone, which occurs at 6,000 meters. And at that depth, life undergoes some pretty fundamental changes. And we're just learning about how life in the Hadal zone is different. If you're just joining us, we are on the dock of the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. That's the research vessel Atlantis in the foreground there. As the crane goes up, the great crane goes up, you'll be able to get a better view of the sub. So if you're just joining us again, we're going to be offloading the research submersible Alvin in just a little bit. The sub comes off every 5 years, goes through a complete overhaul. In 2011, 2013, the titanium personnel sphere in the center, the front of the sub, where people ride, was replaced. This one is the previous one was made of titanium also. If you've been here, you've probably seen it out on the dock or somewhere else around the institution. The new one is, the old one was 2 inches thick, the new one is 3 inches thick. It's about 6 feet in diameter inside, holds 3 people, a pilot and 2 observers. Dives last for anywhere from 8 to 10 hours. They go in the morning, just after breakfast. They're back just before dinner. The reason for this is mainly because they don't want to, they don't like to do recoveries in the dark. It's best to have good visibility. Bring the sub back on board. It weighs 20 tons. That great big A-frame you see sticking up from the, at an angle from the back of the ship, that's what lifts the sub in and out of the water, and there's a single line that holds the entire weight of the sub. So if you're just joining us, we're going to be getting underway shortly here to lift the research sub Alvin off the deck of the research vessel Atlantis. Atlantis is custom. It's custom retrofitted to lift and to hold Alvin, but it's also a general purpose oceanographic research vessel. It's one of the larger ones in the fleet. It's what's called global class research vessel. It's capable of staying at sea for up to 60 days. Carries a science party of about 36 or so. Again, we're just waiting to get underway here. The sub weighs 40,000 pounds. A lot of that is the titanium sphere, of course, and its titanium frame. The white parts of the sub that you can just see are syntactic foam. The syntactic foam is are glass beads embedded in an epoxy resin. You'd think that a sub wouldn't want to have flotation, but they want the sub to sink, but they also want it to be neutrally buoyant. They actually want it to be steady in the water. They don't want to be constantly thrusting up or down to waste battery power. So when the sub's in the water, they have a set of iron weights attached to the sub. Those iron weights bring the sub down to the seafloor. They release half of the weights, or roughly half. The sub is then neutrally buoyant in the water. They go about their business taking samples, making observations, and then when they're done, drop the rest of the weights and the sub comes to the surface. I see we have some scientists who have been in Alvin. If you care to leave comments about your experiences, please do. I see Dan Fernard joined us, Colleen Hansel. Last time the sub was in for its overhaul, like I said, it received a new personnel sphere. It also got better lighting and new cameras. Those cameras are going to be upgraded to 4K with this maintenance period. Those are important because those are not only what we get to see back on shore, what the sub saw, but it's also for the scientists. It's part of the science data that comes off of the sub at the end of a dive. Again, if you're just joining us, we're getting ready to lift the research sub Alvin off of the deck of Atlantis as part of its regular overhaul. Every 5 years or so, the sub comes out of the water, or comes off the ship, I should say. It gets taken completely apart. Every piece is inspected, replace what's needed, and it's put back together. It'll take about a year. So sometime in 2021, when the sub goes back onto the ship, it'll be ready to dive to 6,500 meters, 4 miles deep. That'll put 98% of the seafloor within reach of the sub and the scientists who use it. A little bit of history, as I said, the sub is 56 years old, but really only the name is that old. The entire sub has been replaced over the years, bit by bit. Construction of the sub started in 1962 by General Mills, and it was commissioned in 1964. The name is sort of a mashup of the name of the man who came up with the idea and who championed it. It's Alan Vine. The first support ship, a lot of you know this already, was named Lulu. And that was Alan Vine's mother's name. Alvin made its first dive right here in Woods Hole Harbor in 1964. Bill Rainey was a pilot then. There have been a number of pilots over the years. Several of them you can probably see if you're familiar with the Alvin team walking around here. The Alvin team is notable for the fact that the pilots who dive the sub and who drive it for science, they are also the ones who work on it. They know the sub inside and out. And they have to if they're going to be the only ones down there with two scientists. Sarah Bates is asking if there's a backup sub while Alvin's being overhauled. There's not. Alvin's one of a kind. It's the only deep diving submersible, human-occupied submersible, I should say, in the U.S. research fleet. There are a couple of other options. Alvin is part of the National Deep Submergence Facility, which is a National Science Foundation funded facility operated here at HOV. It has 3 vehicles in it. Alvin is a human-occupied submersible. 3 people ride in it each time. There's also a remotely operated vehicle, Jason, which can also reach 6,500 meters. It's a tethered vehicle. When that is in the water, people on the ship can see real-time video. It has remote-controlled manipulator arms. You can collect samples. When Jason's in the water, it can stay in for as long as, I believe, 8 or 9 days is the current record for the time that that Jason's been in the water. In addition to Alvin and Jason, there's an autonomous underwater vehicle in the National Deep Submergence Facility fleet. That's Sentry. Sentry and Alvin often work in tandem. Sentry would go in overnight, map the seafloor, come back on board. Then the Sentry team will hurriedly download the data, make some maps, and then the folks who are diving in Alvin during the day can revise their dive plans based on those maps. Alan Dranitz is asking, is HOV affiliated with the U.S. Navy? No, we're an independent research organization. However, Alvin is owned by the U.S. Navy. Its official Navy designation is DSV-2. And the pilots who train to operate the sub actually have to sit before a Navy board in order to get their pilot's fins. Right now there are only about 3 or 4 Alvin pilots. There are several who could become active if they get more time behind the stick if necessary. It's a long process to train to become an Alvin pilot, become part of the team as an electrical engineer, mechanical engineer. But you don't do just that. You learn the entire sub, its entire systems, as a member of the Alvin team and as a pilot in training. Arthur Trav was asking, wasn't HOV funded by the Navy a long time ago? Yes, U.S. HOV receives Navy funding periodically, and we received a large amount of funding during World War II. We helped with the war effort. HOV received a commendation medal in the 1940s for its work developing anti-fouling paint. If you're just joining us, we're live from the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution dock in Woods Hole, Massachusetts. It's a lovely New England spring day. We're just watching the research submersible Alvin roll out on the back deck of Atlantis. Peter Cook is asking, no social distancing on the ship. We maintain social distancing as much as possible, as much as safety will allow. And we have been limiting the number of people down on the dock today. So what you see is the absolute minimum. Julia Westwater is reminding me we also have a dozen Navy students in the MIT HOV joint program. Those are master's and PhD students who are enrolled at both MIT and HOV. Kristen, the live video will remain on the HOV Facebook page. If you're just joining us again, we're just waiting for Alvin to get into position in preparation for it to be lifted off of Atlantis. Just a couple minutes here. Alvin comes off the ship every 5 years or so, be taken completely apart, put back together. As I've said before, Alvin is 56 years old, but the only thing that's that old is the name. The sub will remain in a high bay behind us, behind the camera here. You'll see in a little bit. It'll take about a year to take the sub apart, inspect it, upgrade the systems that need to be upgraded in order for it to reach 6,500 meters. Darren wants to know how they move the sub on the ship. There is a track from the garage on the right to the back deck where it gets a little bit further to the left of where it is now, where it gets in position to launch. And there's an electric winch that pulls it out and pulls it back in. Somebody was asking about Danik. That's Danik up on top by the sail. So once the sub is in position for a dive, a little further to the left, as I said, getting back to Darren's question, the A-frame, which is just off to the left of the camera right now, extends back over the sub, and there's a single thick line that attaches to a T-bar just to the right of where Danik is standing right now. And that single line is what lifts the entire 40,000 pounds of the sub off the deck of the ship, sets it in the water. When it's in the water, there are 3 people inside: a pilot, 2 scientists. Once the sub is free of the ship, they flood ballast tanks, and it becomes heavier than water. It becomes negatively buoyant, sinks to the seafloor. They release a set of weights, then the sub becomes neutrally buoyant. It sits perfectly still in the water with some adjustments to the ballast tanks. That way, because it's neutrally buoyant, that way it doesn't they don't have to expend extra power thrusting up or down throughout the course of a dive. Dives last 8 to 10 hours. They go in the morning right after breakfast, come back just before dinner. At the end of a dive, they drop the remaining weights, the sub surfaces, and again, that single line on the extending from the top of the A-frame lifts the entire weight, the entire 40,000 pounds of the sub out of the water and places it very gently back on deck. Okay, we're just getting ready to attach the sub to the lift line. For the coming year, the sub will be in the high bay behind me, be taken completely apart, inspected, put back together, and when it's done, it'll be ready to get to 6,500 meters. That's almost 4 miles depth. At that depth, it'll be able to reach what's called the abyssal zone, up to 6,000 meters, and even into the very top of the Hadal zone. The Hadal zone extends from 6,000 meters all the way to the deepest parts of the ocean, at 11 kilometers and almost 6 miles deep. We've got folks watching from Brazil and from Falmouth. The current depth rating of the sub is 4,500 meters, which is 2.8 miles depth. It's come close to that several times. It doesn't always go to that depth. Depends where scientists want to go, what they want to see. It's dived as deep as just a few hundred meters before. As I said, Alvin is part of the National Deep Submergence Facility, which is funded by the U.S. National Science Foundation. The facility includes Alvin, of course, as well as the research vessel, the remotely operated vehicle Jason and the autonomous underwater vehicle Jason. The remotely operated vehicle Jason and the autonomous underwater vehicle Sentry. Sorry, it's a bit chilly out here. Now, at 6,500 meters depth, the sub will be able to reach 98% of the seafloor. They'll be able to explore parts of the seafloor where there's mid-plate volcanic activity, something that scientists are just beginning to realize may be an important part of tectonic activity on the planet. They can also get to places that are targeted for seafloor mining. The Claret-Clipperton Fracture Zone, for example, just south of Hawaii. James Rosecrans asks, are there plans to replace Alvin with another submersible in the future? There are not. There are other submersibles being built. But Alvin is really one of a kind. It's the only £1,000. Much of that it's titanium, 3-inch thick titanium personnel sphere. The sphere holds all the control systems for the sub, as well as 3 people, the pilot and 2 scientific observers. Dives last anywhere from 8 to 10 hours. With the extended depth range of the sub, they're looking at ways to extend times as well. It's going to happen pretty quickly. Subs are made to be in the water. We don't like to generally leave it in the air for too long. So they're going to lift it, swing it across the view, and put it on this truck right here in the foreground. Right. Lauren's giving a shout out to Drew Bruley, who just became a pilot this December. Okay, my signal should be back now. Joining us. You might wonder what's going on. We're taking the research submersible Alvin off of Atlantis. This is a regularly Just joining us, you're seeing the research submersible Alvin flying through the air, coming off of the research vessel Atlantis in preparation for its 5-year overhaul. At the same time, it will be getting final upgrades that will allow it to reach 6,500 meters or 4 miles depth. This is part of a long-planned activity that will coincide with the midlife overhaul of its support ship Atlantis. Atlantis is now 20 years old, and it's going to get some improvements that will extend its life another 20 years. Yes, Kylie, Alvin's going to keep diving after its overhaul. It's going to be diving even deeper than it is now. The front of the sub that you see in front of you, that is the personnel sphere where 3 people sit during dives. And in front of that is where the science basket is. The science basket can hold up to 500 pounds of equipment and samples. At the end of this overall period, which will last about a year, the sub will perform what's called a set of science verification cruises. Sub weighs about 40,000 pounds. More when it has its lead-acid batteries installed. The sphere will not be replaced, Matthew. That happened last time. Last time it was out of the water, I think in 2013. That's when it got its new personnel sphere. This is the last phase of that overhaul. If you're just joining us, we're just finishing lifting the research submersible Alvin off of research vessel Atlantis. This is part of a planned overhaul activity. The sub will be taken completely apart, which happens just about every 5 years or so. Every piece is inspected. It's put back together, sent back to sea. During this period, the sub's going to get a new variable ballast system. That'll be the final piece of the sub that will allow it to reach 6,500 meters or 4 miles depth.
Hey, we got a little situation here. We need a big enough ladder that people aren't crawling.
The sphere is made of 2 hemispheres, electron welded together. It also has cutouts in it for the portholes. It was tested, I believe, to over 11,000 meters back when it was constructed. Not sure of that, but it is rated to dive to 6,500 meters, which will be the new depth rating for the entire sub. At that depth, the sub will be able to reach 98% of the seafloor. The team that is in charge of the overhaul is also the team that works on the sub, that takes it to sea, and also includes the pilots. The pilots have to know the entire sub, its electrical systems, its mechanical systems, inside and out. Part of the reason for that is that if anything goes wrong at depth, they're the ones who have to be able to troubleshoot from inside the sub. They need to be able to envision everything inside the sphere and outside the sphere. In fact, when they sit for they are Navy certified to be pilots of deep submergence, of a deep diving submersible, and they're quizzed on their knowledge of the sub in front of a Navy board. The battery systems are not going to be upgraded with this overhaul. They're lead acid batteries. One of the reasons they still use lead acid batteries is they're safe and they're reliable. Just waiting to move the sub back into the high bay. First dive after its upgrade has not been decided yet. It'll probably be somewhere here off the East Coast, looking for a suitable location for take it to 6,500 meters. And then once it's gone through its verification dives and it's been checked out to 6,500 meters, it'll be available for the science community once again to take it where they will to do research. Yes, Jason is a separate vehicle. It's a remotely operated vehicle. So it has a long tether that reaches up to the ship where scientists and the Jason team can control it, watch what's coming through on its cameras at all times. There are benefits to both systems. Jason, of course, you can have more than one person watching the camera feed. Lots of people can be observing what Jason sees at all times. They can stay down for long periods of time. You can bring its samples back separately from Jason. With Alvin, you have a 500-pound max, but you can also offload samples onto what's called the deep sea elevator, which will bring samples up to the surface separately. But one of the big benefits to being in Alvin, and a lot of people have said this, is that the perspective that a scientist gains by looking at the seafloor and seeing their study area in context is a very different experience than watching a monitor. It's sitting on a truck, Vincent, but it's really only going about 100 feet. They're just going to back it into the high bay behind me. I'll turn around as it goes. I've said this a couple of times, but Alvin is 56 years old. But the only thing about the sub that's that old is the name. Every 5 years or so, it comes off the ship, gets completely overhauled, pieces get replaced as needed. And there's nothing on the sub. I don't even know how old the oldest piece on the sub is. Thank you, Cindy Chandler, for replying to that one. Alvin is not going to be contributing directly to Seabed 2030, which is to map as much of the seafloor as possible by the year 2030. But certainly the maps that it makes of localized areas on the seafloor will be important. They're very high definition. Bonnie, the video is going to be on our Facebook page. They're just strapping the sub down, getting it ready for its 100-foot journey into the high bay behind me. Somebody asked how tall Alvin is. It's 12 feet tall from the base to the top of the sail. It'll take probably a month to disassemble the sub completely. Then it'll go through a rigorous inspection and replacement process. That'll take about a year. Then it'll be reassembled and be ready to go back in the water in 2021. The sphere was replaced during the last overhaul period, so the sphere will remain, and the only thing that's being upgraded now, about 70% of the sub is ready to go to 6,500 meters. The last bit of the sub to be upgraded is the variable ballast system, the thing that keeps the sub level in the water. Once that is completed, the entire sub will be ready to go to 6,500 meters and be able to reach 98% of the seafloor. Somebody said they were waiting to see Drew, the newest pilot of the group. That's Drew on the ladder right in front of us. As I said before, the pilots also do maintenance and will be contributing to the overhaul. They know the sub inside and out. Hiroko's asking, how long can a science stay in Alvin in the deep sea? The dives last typically 8 to 10 hours. One of the next things they're going to do is weigh the sub. They like to know exactly how much the sub weighs so that they can ballast it appropriately when it's on the ship. There have been emergencies at depth, but by far most of them have been drills. The sub is remarkably safe. They have an incredible safety record, due in great part to the fact that the people who work on the sub are the ones who dive in it. I'm just getting ready to back the sub into its high bay right now. So the swordfish story. Somebody was asking whether a shark has ever bitten the sub. No, a shark has never bitten the sub, but a swordfish once attacked the sub as it was ascending. Got its sword lodged and came up with the sub. They ate very well that night on the ship. James is asking about the electronics and the manipulator. I believe the sub is getting a new manipulator. I have a cheat sheet here. Let's see. Adam Sewell, the chief scientist for the National Deep Submergence Facility, is probably madly typing away to tell you what it is. Yeah, it looks like it's getting an additional Schilling Titan 4 manipulator. They're also going to be updating the electronics and the control systems as well. Somebody was asking about Nick, another pilot in training. He's right there in front in the orange jacket. Katie Chase, will it stay on the platform during the overhaul? No, they're going to, so you see that crane that just came down over the lift point. They're going to lift it off of the flatbed, spin it around 90 degrees, and set it on two 8x8 timbers inside the high bay. It'll stay there for the duration. Well, until it's completely in pieces, and then it'll be all over the place. They'll take all of the electronics out of the personnel sphere and mount them inside what they call a bird cage up in the second floor of this building. And they'll be able to fire up all of the electronics inside the bird cage as if it was actually going on a dive. Some of the other things they're going to be improving, of course, the increased depth capability. It'll be able to reach 6,500 meters. It's 98% of the seafloor. It's going to get new camera systems. They're going to be all 4K cameras. They're going to improve power management, so it'll have longer time in the water, longer battery time. Increased thruster horsepower. They're also going to be able to give it the ability to work better in the midwater, sort of between the surface and the seafloor. And as I said, it's going to get a new manipulator on the front. You'll see it's on the other side of the big plate, the red and white.
Alright.
And then there's one on the cab of the plate, facing forward. Sorry, I had to tell a colleague to go get some cameras we had mounted on the crane. So this upgrade will last about a year. As I've said before, the sub will be taken completely apart, inspected, and put back together. It'll be ready to go in 2021. It'll be ready to go to 6,500 meters. They haven't picked the dive site yet. They're looking at places off the east coast, just south, probably north of Puerto Rico, somewhere around there. Not sure yet. There are plenty of places, lots of places science wants to go. And the National Deep Submergence Facility, which operates the sub, they'll be holding a workshop with scientists from around the country to look at what kind of science objectives they have for working at that sorts of depth. Where would they want to go? What kinds of things would they like to be able to study with the sub? And that'll guide future upgrades, new instruments, new sensors and samplers, things like that. As I said, the sub it's operated by HOV. It's paid for by the National Science Foundation, and it's owned by the U.S. Navy. Its official naval designation is DSV-2. Scientists write grant proposals to any of the funding agencies, mostly National Science Foundation and NASA, to request to take the sub to a particular location. And then when they're accepted, they put in a request to another group known as the National University Oceanographic Laboratory System, or UNOLS. And they handle scheduling of the ships. And if somebody wants to use Alvin, then they have to use Atlantis. And so UNOLS tells them then when they can be on the ship and what ports it'll be leaving from and returning to. And then the scientist has their deadline, and they begin organizing their scientific party to be out on the ship. That group you see over to the left, just to the left of the sub, that's a good portion of the Alvin team. Four pilots and a pilot in training among them. The green merch is a Kylie. It's just that's a safety that's safety apparel for today, just to be visible. The color on Alvin, in fact, is international orange. That's to maximize its visibility when it comes to the surface. Alvin weighs 20 tons in air. I believe Todd's asking what the capacity of the crane is. I believe it's an 80-ton crane. I can't remember. We're just waiting here for Alvin to be lifted up off the flatbed and set inside the high bay where it'll undergo its overhaul. Katie's asking if there are other subs like it in other countries. Yes. So Alvin is the only one in the U.S. like it. There is a Japanese sub, the Shinkai, a Chinese sub known as Jiaolong. There were 2 Russian subs, the Mirs. I don't believe they're active anymore. And then there was a French sub that I don't believe is active anymore either. Francis is asking what year was the deepest dive. I don't recall when last went to 4,500 meters. I'll check the dive logs are online. If you search for Alvin dive log, you'll be able to see every information about every dive it's ever made. Jenny's asking how wide is Alvin? 8.5 feet. It's 12 feet tall, 23 feet long. Weighs about 40,000 pounds. I think we'll be wrapping up here in a little while. Just to recap, saw the research submersible Alvin lifted off of research vessel Atlantis. Alvin is coming in for a regularly scheduled overhaul. Every 5 years or so it comes out off the ship, gets taken completely apart and put back together again. This time it's going to receive the final phase of an upgrade that's been going on since 2013. And when it's done with this phase of its upgrade, it will be fully ready to dive to 6,500 meters, reach 98% of the seafloor. It's going to take about a year, a little over a year, and it coincides with midlife refit of its support vessel, Atlantis. Atlantis is a little over 20 years old now. It's going to get new engines, new lighting, new network. And when Atlantis comes back in 2021, next year, we'll reverse this process again, put the sub back on, and it'll head out. The sub will head out for its first dives to 6,500 meters. There's been one female pilot. Anybody want to guess her name? That's the Alvin team to the left just conferring. They're getting ready to lift the sub off and place it in the high bay for the to begin work and taking it apart. Nice job, Kylie. Yes, Cindy Van Dover, the only female Alvin pilot. Brian's asking who gets to choose what they listen to. I think it's the pilots choose descent and the scientists can choose for ascent. Somebody else can correct me on that. Thanks, Charlotte. I think it's the pilot. Sometimes the pilot relinquishes the playlist to the scientists. Okay, Colleen is saying the pilot takes requests if you have a nice pilot. If you're with Danik, who's down there in the middle, you might get treated to some Norwegian heavy metal on the way down. Does Alvin have siblings? I think so. The original sphere, they made 3 or 4 originals of the original spheres, replicas. And one of those went into a sub called Sea-Pup. And one other sub. His name is escaping me. Yes. Somebody was asking about the background of the pilots. Most of them are engineers. Somebody was asking where Nick Osaccia was. He's the fellow. Just see him over in the orange jacket. Nick was a student at Cape Cod Community College here on Cape Cod, and interned in Julie Huber's lab at Hui for a summer. Then he went back to school to North and graduated from Northeastern. And now he's back as a member of the Alvin team, training to be an Alvin pilot. All right, I think we're going to wrap up now. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Hope everyone's safe and healthy. This video will be back on our Facebook page shortly. And check back for more updates about the upgrade and about the eventual first dives to 6,500 meters by the research vessel Atlantis. Take care, everyone.